church bulletin. And if you got one, you're in the wrong place. No, we don't have any church bulletins. Rolling? All right. I was going to continue just a little bit more regarding how one's fact-based neural activities tend to treat their more act-based kin. You recall that's what we were talking about, and I wanted to a little more specifically point out that the more fact-based, sophisticated, and verbal neural energies they tend to treat, talking about now individually, inside of you, they would tend to treat their more act-based, their older counterparts, the non-speaking, as it were, parts of the nervous system now, as somewhat shameful, bucolic, outdated, almost unnecessary from their view, relatives. Almost, once you get a feel for what's going on in the human nervous system inside of you, in that neural hierarchy, under the spatial conditions under which we live, the more fact-based, to wrap it up for a second, their attitude, their inclination toward the more act-based is almost one of minimal toleration and not much more. Now, if any of you have any possible frog strangling difficulty with that, again, is probably easy to see. We've been through this part of the field with the plow before. To see under Western contemporary conditions what's normally referred to as those kinds of interplay, conflict between, in the political terms, of conservatives and liberals, that sort of thing, progressives and sticks in the mud. But it is a feel out there when you're apparently talking about the external manifestations of it on a wider scale. You're treating, or you're looking at those that are more fact-based, which would normally be referred to as intellectuals, progressives, liberals, under that relative ball game. And they look upon the more conservative, the more, and in the past, bucolic was not a pejorative term, but it was closer to those that were still tied to the soil at one time. Those who are still closer to having to some degree, with their hands, make a daily living. And there is a certain kind of superiority. There is a certain kind, from one view, a certain kind of basis for that superiority, in that the fact-based areas of humanity and the individual are now more in line with the operational cutting edge of what's happening. And so there is a certain amount of being able to look upon that as being the poor kin. That's easy enough to see, surely, without any sort of qualitative judgment on your part about what's going on politically or outside. But it's in here. It's what has never been noted. Psychology has not even gotten around to the mechanical part of taking in particular notice of there being a quite real electrochemical basis, as easy as I've described it, for the operations of the brain in a certain way. They see all sorts of conflicts, and it gets into when the conflict is enough to even be noticed by clinical psychology, for instance. It is already to the level of at least a fairly innocuous, if there is such a thing, neuroses. In other words, it is something out of the ordinary that a fully functional, sane person, which they'd hate to describe that as somebody who they will probably never get to pay for treatment. Someone who needs no counseling. But a sane person, the ideal would be someone who had no what? No ICs. No internal conflicts. And of course, they describe it. Conventional wisdom is on the basis of some sort of personality struggle, some sorts of conflicts as yet unresolved between subconsciously induced traumatic experiences as opposed to the social, reasonable drive for one's self-realization and that sort of stuff. But it is not seen as being a normal outcome, as being an even observable, and if it served any purpose, which it doesn't, even a measurable, that is, you can see it. It is a quantum reality that there is an electrochemical relationship that is, from any view once it's seen, a kind of conflict, except on the basis, as the Kyroot was pointing out tonight, that in the secondary world, when it's seen, the kind of apparent conflict, struggle between ideas, when it's seen in the secondary world, in the civilized world of man, and all of those struggles between ideas, between philosophies, between facts, there are no winners and losers in those battles. They're simply battles. And so that is why psychology and everything else, that is, it's not limited to that, that there is no precise, there is no general awareness of anything behind the apparent psychological dramas that they can describe that produce conflicts, and that the conflicts are in some way pathological. I mean, no one is here. It would wreck the ordinary affairs of life right now if someone could change this, and we are not here saying that there is some error going on that is costing humanity due to the poor diagnostic skills of psychology. Because for them to see this in the garb of it being psychological dramas being played out internally, which are unresolved conflicts, which should be treated, which can be treated, if treated properly, if they could accidentally find the way, if they could find the way, that the resolution of these conflicts would be a boon to the individual. But I refer you again, there are no winners and losers in these kind of contests. They're simply contests. There are no heroes and villains in these battles. They're simply battles. Between struggles and battles, those of you that know how to do your own synonym dictionary, you could replace all that with growth, breath, vitality. Yes, but who wants to be alive if you got to struggle? Write that down. Not you, sir. I believe you're dead. I will not accept notes from a dead man. Just everyone has their own little idiotic eccentricities. There is, within this internal unnoticed difference, conflict, different view, altered orientation between more fact-based operations of the nervous system at this end and the more act-based operations. Within this, for a would-be electrical adventurer, it creates a lack of any direct plain communication between the two by not understanding that this is a situation of operational normalcy. It cuts down, it cuts out severely any possible new, useful travel information and tips. Because you're apparently involved with somebody wanting to take a bus and somebody else wanting to take a Greyhound, or somebody else wanting to take a plane and somebody else wanting to stay at home, somebody else wanting to fly to Rotterdam for the Spring Jazz Festival, and someone else, without even saying so, looking at an airplane, even looking at a picture and going. All of that seems to be those kinds of need-be potentially reconcilable differences. They are never reconciled, as you, I'm sure, have noted by now. They are not reconciled by psychology. They're not reconciled by religion. They are not reconciled by life, because there is no reconcilable difference extant. There is the energy being churned up by there apparently being this. The energy is churned up whether you're aware of the situation or not. The energy continues to work for the good of life whether you have any awareness of it or not. But for someone attempting to travel, to move internally here, there is potentially, hint, 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 potentially quite useful travel tips if there was a more direct, if there was any direct, plain communication between the more fact-based neural activities and the more act-based. As a real side of no great consequence, I will point out that under different guises, under very crude verbal schematics and theories, throughout religion, conventional wisdom, and psychology, this kind of dream has been dreamt and talked about, but not in the kind of words I'm using. Withal, let us do-si-do it and look at it for a second from the other direction. That if the more act-based nervous system activity could speak think, or act-based, if it could speak think, it would find its more fact-based cousins. This would be, if I may speak for it, it would tend to find its more fact-based cousins to be a bit pretentious, evasive, indecisive, a little fey even, and again, to wrap it up from their view, would be even, by God, unnecessary. As always, as I'm sure all of you remember, I just made up a new term of speak think. It is that the areas of the primary world, the act-based older counterparts, still extant counterparts, irreplaceable counterparts in the nervous system that we're now referring to for the night as act-based, do not speak think in the same way that what you normally think of is your thoughts, your regular mental activities. They do not. As again, swimming around the areas of whether it be sharks or minnows, conventional wisdom, psychology, trying to put their finger on unconscious, subconscious, blah, 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 drives and motivations, as though they are unfathomable. Wait a minute, they wouldn't say that, would they? Yes, unfathomable, except, we're glad you asked, except with professional help. And the same as my cousin Bubba guarantees his body and fender work, you guarantee your work. Sir, you're a bit of a bumpkin. We, in the psychiatry business, are not quite at the same level as your cousin, whatever his name was, because we're our profession, and if you will check with an attorney, we do not guarantee results. We guarantee performance. Would you care to translate that? Our tacit guarantee under Anglo-Saxon common law origins is that we guarantee an execution of our duties on par with the prevailing standards of the other professionals in this like business, in the like surroundings. Would you care to translate it one more time for me? We don't guarantee results. Back to what we were saying from the other view. So you do understand, but now there is a reality to the nervous system. Everyone knows this. I didn't make this up. Huh. It's nice to finally get on stable ground. I didn't make this up. Everyone knows you can do things such as reach down and pull out a French fry out of the deep fry cooker right at the top without even looking, or to drop one in. You can do it at home. You don't have to be a professional short order cook. Although it's good to see people work their way up in life from being an attorney or a dentist to being a short order cook. But you can stand there at home and you can drop in a hash brown, a home fry, while talking to your dog, to your child. You can reach over. You know all this. You can drive a car, ride a bicycle, you can do all kinds of stuff without what? Thinking about it. Everybody knows that. But it's just, by and large, dismissed to a side room, to a back room, only if it apparently has some pathological, some morbific aspects of it to the degree to need treatment. Which I guess seems fair enough, unless you consider the ability to ride a bicycle to be some sort of affliction. You know, can you help me? I can't quit riding a bicycle. That even frightens me. You have the aspect of the nervous system, though. I was going to take you back to that view, that if it could speak, if, you can play this, if in some way it could communicate and actually spoke, at least to itself, which would be to you, assuming you're at home, if it could speak in that way, it would, from its view, it would have its own attitude toward its fact-based, more fact-based. We should always say more because it is get ready all you physicists, it is a continuum. Yeah. Plus all of you astrophysicists. I don't know why I'm looking around, we don't have any here. We have an astro dentist, but if it could speak in that way, it would have its own view of its kin, that's parts of the nervous system that are more act-based. But their attitude would be, to put it in fact-based terms, they would see them as being the poor country cousin, pants too short, bad haircut, outdated, very unhip ideas, too conservative, almost frightened of its own shadow. Just, you would prefer, they may be good folks, but you would prefer that they do not show up at your cocktail party. Okay. Not with your friends, not with fact-based acquaintances. And they are ultimately seen in the same way, if you followed it on the reverse side, they would likewise see their fact-based counterparts, relatively speaking, as always, in a polarized world you got no choice unless, I thought some of you were going to find out how to separate a positive charge magnetic field from a negative. Once somebody will do that, by God, we can get somewhere. At any rate, that's what relatively speaking is. That is. Can you find up without down, positive without negative, hot without cold? If you can, we're all right. They would see, relatively speaking, they would see the factual part not only as being pretentious, evasive, inconclusive, yammering, always theorizing talk. They would, from a relatively speaking view, they would see them as actually unnecessary. Because, in fact, it was true that at one time, in your lifetime, in your nervous system's lifetime, and then in an institutional, broader lifetime, you have been alive, you have functioned, humanity has functioned without a fact-based aspect of the nervous system. So, for that aspect, if it could think, talk in this way, for it to see the fact-based aspect of the nervous system as being actually unnecessary, there is validity. That may sound easy enough, but now let's go back to the first part. The fact-based, if it looked in the way in which we are verbally diagramming this, if it looked upon what we're describing, sketching as the act-based areas of the nervous system, if it looked at it in any way similar to the way in which we are, which is not completely without merit, the fact-based would see the act-based not only as being behind the times, but it would also see them as being unnecessary. They might say, well, at one time we needed it, and relatively speaking, we may need a little of it, but now, for instance, in the United States, can't pull out the exact figures, but it's some minute portion, for instance. Go to food, one of the great 3 S's of primary act-based reality, that it's just some minuscule proportion of the population in the Western world now raises food for the rest of us. I don't know what, it's just 1 or 2%. So from that view, the fact base could say, well, at one time, without any doubt, our country cousins, those involved with more act-based activities, and of course, as always, if they were sharp at all, they'd say, all right, there's got to be somebody more act-based. Somebody's got to be raising food, working in the mines, assuming we still need to carry civilization on a blender. Somebody got to work in the mines to come up with a blender, because not everyone knows how to do that trick that was in the Kyroots. I know some of you laughed in a very suspiciously nervous manner about the guy that told the salesman, as long as I got a brain, I don't need a blender. Not everyone can do that, and so there's still a need for blenders and toasters and automobiles. But relatively speaking, the more fact-based would see the rest of it as being just almost unnecessary, except maybe 1 or 2%, just a few people. Not me, because I am not a farmer, I do not work in the mines, but I understand we need some of that out here on an institutional level. But almost in each individual, assuming that you're just ordinarily sophisticated, civilized, in the individual, if it was presented their nervous system, knowing which we are, the fact base would treat the act base as, well, at least in me personally, it's, constructively speaking, unnecessary. I no longer need it. At one time, I know I did, but I no longer need it. Of course, thankfully, you cannot get that kind of message directly to your DNA. And if you could, of course, thankfully, as far as I can still tell, your DNA cannot pull a gun or a knife on you. Because if you could get the message to your DNA, I assume you follow, you would be seriously, there's no good word for it yet, the law would have to catch up. It would be a form of homicide, brilliant in its execution, exhilarating in its bloodiness. But still, what I'm trying to get you to see is once you get here, the parts of the act base that are still close enough to talk about, and then the fact base, which we're obviously talking about, they would look at each other across what it would amount to. If you remember my line drawn through the nervous system, the kind of general level of consciousness, they would see it as almost a split rail fence dividing the city in fact-based reality, fact-based thinking, from the act-based. And the act-based being the older counterpart, the more basic, just down near illiterate. But, relatively speaking, we got to have them. Not necessarily with me, but somebody got to have those kind of country cousins to raise the crops and do the mines and all that. But it doesn't have to be my cousins. It got to be somebody else. They would both look across that fence and see each other, relatively speaking, when it's, I hate to use historical talk, but when push came to shove. No. Well, it's not really history. It was a vaudeville team. But when it comes to that, they would both, carried to a certain degree, they would both see each other as being, ultimately, relatively speaking, unnecessary. Thus, you might consider that there continues to be apparent contest and struggles between the thinkers and the doers. With no conclusive victor save life and a stray revolutionist here and there. I was hoping to make a dramatic end to that paragraph, because that, to somebody's satisfaction, to his, that was a potential wrap. You have to change the terminology from fact-based and act-based. The thinkers and the doers, which pops up all the way from the great Sumerians leaving their comic books, right up until today, throughout all institutionalized fields of the arts, sciences, and each individual is a feeling between. There being some sort of struggle or even a contest. You don't have to take it in a real aggressive, hostile manner, but somewhere between those two kind of descriptions is this continuing feel between the thinkers and the doers. But at that level, no matter how intelligent, no matter how educated you are, there never appears to be a conclusive winner, except for life. I guess we should really put that in parentheses, if they won't boil me in parenthetical law. But nobody ever sees that. You know, ordinary intelligence, you know that. How is this benefiting me? Or if they are wrapped up in some sort of ersatz social consciousness. How might this benefit us? But nobody ever says, wait a minute, what's going on here? All this fandango dancing and throwing each other around and wrestling and arguing, this is serving no purpose. Did your ordinary intelligence, the answer is no, well, I can ask you, did your ordinary intelligence ever tell you, did you ever hear anyone's intelligence tell them, well, certainly it's benefiting somebody, it's benefiting life? Did you already guess the answer? The answer was no. Nobody ever guesses that. That's why you can say that there is no conclusive winner. Never even the appearance of any conclusive victor. There is no impression of there being a triumph in the struggle between the thinkers and the doers. Saved for life. And a stray revolutionist. Just here and there. That is somebody who has some direct, plain suspicion of what's going on. And of course doesn't care. But you knew that. I just hate to say it because it always frightens our sponsors. We don't still have any sponsors, do we? Well, there is, I should say this, because of the way I mistreated the old gentleman a couple of nights ago. There is this old man over in the corner that sits over here that in regard to what I said, all right, well, he already told me when I came out, so, but we'll pretend. You don't put the camera, just, we can't afford to pay him, so don't get him on there. All right. He says, I'm just, well, I can't apologize. I'm more or less literally quoting him because I don't want to brag or you think I've got a photogenic memory. I guess that'd be better than nothing, having nothing photogenic about you. At any rate, the old guy says, hey, you got to know when to be nice to yourself. You got to know when to lord it over yourself. And you got to know when to ass whip yourself. And fair being fair, over on this side of the room, your right, my left, there is a kid that I won't pretend because I already know what he said. And he, perhaps in response to this, the kid adds, sounds to me like, says he, that anyone who could do all of that proportionately, conscientiously, would have to be a real revolutionist, if not their own king, God, city, or old man and kid. It's not nice to quote someone and then make an editorial comment. So we'll move on. Inasmuch and or since you do not ordinarily think about your act-based existence, comma, and or dash, comma, or dash, I'm sorry. I have all these people that took an English course in high school keep writing. Inasmuch as you do not ordinarily think about your act-based existence, but I'll give a comma at least, like this, so think about it a second. Do I ever think about my act-based existence? Well, I'll save you some time, we're running short as usual. The answer is, I always get confused, is it Portland? Or is it Bangor? The answer is no. So I'll ask you. Inasmuch as people do not ordinarily think about their act-based existence. You remember where we were now. Don't get confused. Don't drift over into Newfoundland. Those of you are still tied up with the pseudo-geographical lesson. And don't write me and tell me how to pronounce geographical. Sit around and say it for about an hour. Or say the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Institute of Technology. Say it over for about an hour. Well, Judge, I hate to say it, most of you would probably take about 3 minutes. And then see what happens. So don't get hung up in the geographical question. Because it surely by God, it had to be somewhere metaphorical. The answer is no. Do you ever think about your act-based existence? You or anyone? No. No, 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 no. You do not. Since you do not, oh, all right, without making it into a fact-based database, because you do think about your existence and you do not think about it at the exclusion of the act-based, but back to the opening gambit. Since you do not directly, ordinarily, no one, think about your act-based existence, then I was going to ask to consider in what broader, more general, institutionalized way might you be thinking of your factual, human, secondary life, which, remember, it does not exclude the act-based, but you cannot directly, ordinarily think about it. You do not think about it. Take your choice. Since I said you cannot, you can prove it wrong. You ordinarily do not. But in what way do you ordinarily, on a wide range, just ordinary institutionalized level, do you think about your humane, civilized, sophisticated, up-to-date, ordinary, middle-of-the-bell curve, bourgeoisie existence? And I was going to offer quick possible categories to ask you to, if you'd like to, consider on your own. In a broader sense, do you think of your human existence on a kind of religious, mythical basis? You think of it more on a psycho, not that kind of psycho, psychological, humanistic basis? I guess it's best that I did make that plain. Although it's not incorrect just to use psycho, but on the basis of a more psychological, humanistic basis. Or how about on a footing, on a basis of new, untried, unhistorical basis? I shouldn't play around when the tape's running out. I intended to say historical, see, and I just said hysterical because some people enjoy a joke in a certain way. But as opposed to, that about covers it if you see it for yourself. If you use the possibility of religious, mythical basis, or if you use as a second other possibility a more psychological, humanistic basis, that, for all intents and purposes for any secondary investigation, would cover the possibilities. The third one I threw in would be new, not just new because I said it was new or because you said it was new. It is new out there in that great chemical plane wherein lightning never ceases to strike. It would be new. It would be beyond that restaurant, you recall, that single eatery with that front door notice that said, for diners fully armed and dangerously hungry, no reservations required. So somewhere either deep within the bowels of that soul leadery, according to how you want to look at it, or somewhere over the horizon, away from the single place that ordinary people receive their neural nourishment. Somewhere beyond that would be the third possibility I was suggesting, wherein it was new, untried, unhistorical, footing. How about subversively ponder this, that the study, no matter how sincere, no matter how scientific, but the study of any universe from within its own confines can never progress beyond the quasar-ridden outskirts of its own reality, no matter what's done. And I do not use scientific and sincere in any casual manner. The proof is right before you. Says you. The proof is everywhere. Well, where? Where? Give me a microscope. Don't you mean a telescope? All right, give me that too. But it's everywhere. Well, I got to have more machinery. I got to have more technology. Yeah, but it's everywhere. Well, I got to have a little more education. See what you mean. See what you mean, sir. Sorry I brought it up. If the study of any universe, no matter how sincere the study, no matter how well founded, no matter how well financed, no matter how scientific, no matter how logical, no matter how cutting edge be the technology and the education, any study done of any universe from within the confines can never progress, will never get beyond, I assume you know metaphorically, well, symbolically, the quasar-ridden, the observable outskirts, the edges of reality. It can never get past that. They can, in the polarized scientific, mathematical, if not observable sense, say that they are pushing back the frontiers, for instance, in cosmology, in a three-dimensional world, of pushing back reality, but they keep seeing, all right, we're getting closer to the original Big Bang, etc. We're now seeing even more distant, red-shifted quasars. The little bitty babies, we're seeing the nursery, temporally speaking, of the universe. They keep pushing it. Let's say they do. They say they do. I'm not questioning that. But you'll never get beyond that quasar-ridden edge. It's not possible. Now, could I suggest right quick, could we drop all pretext of science and cosmology? Yeah. You mean you're speaking about my forehead? No. The finger. No. Let's try it a little more fleshy. That no matter how you try and think about or try and study yourself from any recognized position or from any institutionalized or under any institutionalized auspices, that you attempt to think about you, to study yourself. No matter what you do, all of these first causes, seminal events, all the big bangs are going to forever remain part of the dark matter. For those of you that keep up with it. That is, that you'll never know why anything's so. Because it's not possible. We're back now, if you want to jump back to the cosmological model, that the attempt to study, no matter how it's done, no matter who does it, any universe from within its own confines can never get beyond the edges of its own reality. For you, for anybody, under any ordinary conditions, to attempt to think about themselves, study themselves. I don't care how sincere. I don't care how many drugs you take. I don't care how many drugs you don't take. These kinds of pushing out until I reach the nursery, until I find my own seminal event, until I in some way psychologically find my own beautiful little cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates, until I can get back to Eden, until I find the seed that gave birth to me and my psychology. Can't happen. All you can do is apparently keep pushing back the frontiers. Hey, we've spotted a new quasar beyond the ones we had, which is psychologists saying, well, if you were a psychologist doing it to yourself, well, I thought it was the way that my father mistreated me at my 7th birthday. I've been working on that now for a damn good 10 years, and suddenly, though, I realize I can now think back to my 6th birthday, and I remember when my mother said, boy, have you got a big nose for a kid. You're pushing back the frontiers, you're now seeing quasars even further, but you cannot get past the edge of your own reality. Not psychologically, what I started out trying to give you a parallel hardwired map, tangible. Surely you can see this. I mean, it's so obvious you might think that science should see it, but that ain't the point. That you cannot see past the quasar-ridden edge. You can apparently keep pushing it. Yes, now we can see further. Well, fine. That's a good hobby. Boy, we're about to get it. No way. It's not possible. It is not chemically, electrically, it is not three-dimensionally possible. That you cannot understand, you cannot study a universe from within it and get past the edges of its reality. You cannot think about you, which would be the universe. You cannot think, you cannot study, it doesn't matter under what conditions, under what name, under what apparent auspices, and get past the edges of, yes, I'm studying, I know a lot more about me than I did. Do you know what caused you? Hey, give me a break, I'm working on it. I'm pushing back the frontiers of my knowledge. It's a hobby. But to believe that, yes, any day now. Are you Chuck Jackson or a psychologist? Any day? No, you're not going to get there. Trying to think about, trying to see yourself from within your own nervous system, within your own universe, you cannot get past the edges of it. And the edges are distinct. The edges are the limits of ordinary thinking. Absolutely out of time, right? Well, au revoir. Epilogue. I have received questions from some of you people out there, and hello to Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, Arizona. We got some people now starting in San Francisco again. I know there are a few of you that tapes are getting, and up to Washington State and the other places, high. So I've been, over a period of time, received some inquiries, and it's happened here, not inquiries, but the reality of it, questions regarding some of you asking, why is it that it seems at times there's a strange kind of sleepiness comes over at me at these meetings, or you people out there watching the tapes? But hey, fair is fair, let's turn it around for a change, and you tell me. You tell me, / you, what's going on, what's up? Now assuming, which I do not, and it happens here, it's just to the point now, as you notice, those of you that don't know, I do not turn around now and say, get the hell out of here. But there's some of you that sit here, unless you assume I'm in some kind of daze. There's some of you that, and some of you will sit right up close. I'm not going to look and point at anybody, and you're here faithfully. And let's assume that your interest in it is not in question. There's no doubt about that. And yet you seem to suffer enough for you to write me that you're not even having to put up with me in person. You're watching on tape 3,000 miles away, and you point out that you continue to go, and some of you that are just right in the middle of keeping the groups together out there and here, and you're saying that really bothers you. If your interest in it is not in question, then I was just going to say, you tell us. You tell me, you. But at least consider this. If your interest is not in question, consider the possibility of some kind of, my God, how about some kind of Unholy overload. It's just a fucking thought. And I guess you'll be getting it late, but those of you who don't show up, happy St. Quantum's Day. And by now I assume that you guys are over it and everyone's paid their bail and gotten your automobile back in running condition, if not your own brain. So, don't forget, eat beans, run, write if you get work, keep on smiling, don't take any wooden nickels. Reality helps those that help themselves. A man that's never met a man he didn't like's never met anybody. God save me from the Presbyterians, and after that I can help myself. And all of the other inspiring and thought-provoking cliches that you can think of under the conditions in which your nervous system should be operating after St. Q's Day. Bye. Bye, bye, bye.